The Kennedy family is a political family that has had one of the biggest impacts in American history, up there with other families such as the Bushes and the Rockefellers. One thing that separates them from the rest, however, is the constant amount of tragedies, mishaps, incidents, and calamities that seem to have followed the family for decades. It has been often dubbed as the Kennedy curse, and it follows a series of chronological incidents and deaths that has haunted the family for decades, from medical mishaps to lives tragically cut short, to addiction battles, suicide, and more. In this video, we will be detailing all the incidents of the Kennedy curse in chronological order, from the first recorded instance of the curse to its most recent. In-laws to the Kennedy family will also be included in this video. Be warned, as from this point forward, this will be a very heavy video, with mentions of murder, overdoses, suicide, and more. Viewer discretion is advised. Nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Kennedy curse, a family's history of misfortune. Rosemary Kennedy was born on September 13, 1918, in Brookline, Massachusetts. She is the third child and first daughter of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. Due to a difficult childbirth, Rosemary was unable to live a normal childhood. Due to a lack of brain oxygen during her birth, she had difficulty crawling, sitting up, and learning how to walk by the time she was 2 years old, when most children would have been able to achieve that with relative ease. According to accounts of her life by her family, she may have had an intellectual disability, although questions were raised about the scope of their accounts. In her early years, and despite the help of tutors, she struggled to learn how to read and write. In her teen years, she was first sent to a Philadelphia boarding school for people with intellectual disabilities, and later a convent school in Providence, Rhode Island. In the latter school, she was taught by a teacher and two nuns, all day, every day, in a separate room, away from other students. In 1938, while her father served as U.S. Ambassador to Britain, Rosemary was introduced as a debutante to King George VI and his wife Queen Elizabeth, now known today as the Queen Mother, at Buckingham Palace in London. However, by the time she came home, her situation had deteriorated. According to Rosemary's sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, by the time she was back in the U.S. in 1940, she had become, quote, increasingly irritable and difficult, and would experience convulsions and violent fits of rage, where she would attack and injure others. After brief stints at a Massachusetts summer camp and another Philadelphia boarding school, she was sent to a convent school in Washington, D.C., where she would reportedly sneak out at night. This led to concern by convent nuns that Rosemary may have had sexual interactions in which she may become pregnant or contract a sexually transmitted disease, also known as an STD. Her father was fearful that her behavior may damage or destroy the family's political prospects and ambitions, as well as embarrassing the family. The next year, doctors would recommend to her father that a lobotomy, a now discredited medical procedure, would stop her mood swings and fits of rage. Joe Sr. decided to go through with the lobotomy, but did not inform his wife or family of the procedure until it was completed. According to a 1996 biography on Joe Sr., titled Sins of the Father, by author Ronald Kessler, the doctors who carried out the procedure, named James W. Watts and Walter Freeman, describes Rosemary's operation to Kessler. In the book, Kessler writes, quote, "After Rosemary was mildly sedated, we went through the top of the head," Dr. Watts recalled. "I think she was awake. She had a mild tranquilizer. I made a surgical incision into the brain through the skull. It was near the front. It was on both sides, and we just made a small incision, no more than an inch. The instrument Dr. Watts used looked like a butter knife. He swung it up and down to cut brain tissue. We put an instrument inside," he said. As Dr. Watts cut, Dr. Freeman asked Rosemary some questions. For example, he asked her to recite the Lord's Prayer, or sing God Bless America, or count backwards. We made an estimate on how far to cut based on how she responded. When Rosemary began to become incoherent, they stopped. The procedure was botched, and it ended up backfiring for both Rosemary and the family, as it was quickly obvious that the lobotomy had caused massive harm. Her mental capability was diminished that of a 2-year-old. She was unable to walk, speak intelligibly, and was incontinent, meaning she had no control of her urine. After the procedure, Rosemary was institutionalized, first staying at a New York private psych hospital known as Craig House for several years, before being moved to the town of Jefferson, Wisconsin in 1949, residing at the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children, back then known as the St. Coletta Institute for Backward Youth, for the rest of her life. Rosemary was also separated from her family entirely, with her mother not visiting for 20 years and her father not seeing her again for the rest of his life. In the book, Rosemary, the Hidden Kennedy Daughter, author Kate Larson wrote that her lobotomy was hidden from the family for 20 years, and that all her siblings didn't know of her whereabouts. When questions rose about her situation in 1958 during JFK's re-election bid to the U.S. Senate, the family explained that she was simply reclusive and did not explain her situation until after JFK won the presidency in 1961. Even then, they didn't reveal the failed lobotomy, and instead explained that she was institutionalized due to being deemed as, quote, mentally retarded. That same year, after Joe Sr. suffered a stroke, the family was made aware of her location. Rosemary's condition was revealed publicly by her sister Eunice during a 1962 interview with the Saturday Evening Post, but her lobotomy wasn't publicly disclosed all the way until 1987, when author Doris Goodwin disclosing it in her book, The Fitzgeralds and the Kennedys. After Joe Sr. died in 1969, the family slowly became involved in Rosemary's life again. She was taken to see relatives in Florida and D.C., as well as her childhood home in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. She learned how to walk again, albeit with a limp, but never regained the ability to speak clearly, and one of her arms was paralyzed. Rosemary Kennedy would die peacefully of natural causes on January 7, 2005, at the Fort Atkinson Memorial Hospital in Wisconsin. She was 86 years old. She would be buried beside her parents at the Hollywood Cemetery in Brookline, Massachusetts. Rosemary Kennedy's story is largely forgotten today, and her story must be remembered as one of tragedy and pain. A young life taken away by a father's fear and a family's ambition. Joseph Patrick Kennedy Jr. was born on July 25, 1915, at a rented summer cottage in the town of Hull, Massachusetts. He is the oldest son of the aforementioned Joseph and Rose Kennedy. As the oldest child, he began to be groomed by his father at an early age to enter the world of politics, and was reportedly predicted to be the first Catholic to become president. In his early years, he attended Dexter School in the city of Brookline with his younger brother John, and later graduated from Choate Hall, a preparatory boarding school in Wallingford, Connecticut in 1933. After studying for a year at the London School of Economics, he enrolled in Harvard College, where he graduated in 1938 at the age of 23 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He then attended Harvard Law School from 1939 to 1941, where he then enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserve in June of that year. In the reserve, he began training to be a naval aviator and was officially commissioned as an ensign, aka a junior commissioned officer, in May of 1942. By the time of the winter of 1943 to 44, Joe Jr. was piloting B-24 heavy bombers on anti-submarine details on 2 tours of duty. On the 1st of July, Joe Jr. had been promoted to the rank of lieutenant and had the option to come home, but instead volunteered for a mission known as Operation Aphrodite, a decision that would ultimately cost him his life. For context, Operation Aphrodite was a mission by the U.S. Army Air Forces to convert B-17 and PB-4Y-1 heavy bombers into aircraft laced with explosives, flying bombs, if you will, and used for precision attacks on targets that were normally well protected against other weapons. The Navy had their own part of Operation Aphrodite, which was named Operation Anvil. For the first mission under Anvil, both Joe Jr. and a fellow lieutenant named Whifford J. Willie were chosen as the pilots to carry out said mission. The goal? To take out a German V3 caliber gun development site at a hamlet known as Mimieques in France. On the 12th of August, the mission began. First, 2 Lockheed Ventura medium and patrol bombers and a B-17 navigation plane took off from RAF Fairfield Base in England at 6 o'clock local time. Then, the BQ-8 robot aircraft that both Joe Jr. and Willie were piloting, laced with over 21,000 pounds of bombs, took off from the base. Following them was an F-8 Mosquito photo reconnaissance plane, which was sent to document and film the mission. During the mission, both Joe Jr. and Willie completed the first part of the mission, which was the plane's first remote turn near the coast of the North Sea. Both removed the safety pin of the explosives, therefore arming them, and Joe Jr. said his last words, "Spade, flush," which was the agreed code for the mission. However, before the planned bailout near RAF Manston Base, the plane's explosive prematurely blew up, destroying the plane and killing both Joe Jr. and Willie instantly. The debris from the explosion landed at a nearby village, causing widespread damage and small fires, albeit with no reported injuries. After the incident, the mission's operations were paused for a month, while equipment was modified and an investigation into the incident took place. No more Operation Anvil missions from the Navy would take place after this incident. Both Joe Jr. and Willie were posthumously awarded multiple accolades, those being the Navy Cross, Air Medal, and the Purple Heart. A headstone for Joe Jr. was later placed at Arlington National Cemetery, with another memorial placed inside Mimouquet's Fortress in France. Joseph Kennedy Jr. is a man who valiantly served his country and sacrificed his life to help for and eventually liberate Europe from the hands of Nazi Germany. He will forever be missed. William Cavendish, the Marquess of Hartington, was born on September 10, 1917, in the city of London, England. He was the eldest son to Edward Cavendish, who was the 10th Duke of Devonshire, and Lady Mary Cavendish, who had the title of Duchess of Devonshire. He received his education from Eton College, a public boarding school in the region of Berkshire, and Trinity College, a school that was affiliated with the University of Cambridge. He entered the British military as a commissioned officer in the Coldstream Guards during World War II, but didn't see combat until 1944. In the February of that year, Cavendish ran for office, running for Parliament in a by-election for the seat of West Derbyshire that took place on February 18th. He ran as a candidate of the Wartime Coalition, run by Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Conservative Party. His opponent was one Charles F. White Jr., who ran as an independent candidate after resigning from the Labour Party. In that election, White defeated Cavendish by a solid margin, with White receiving 57.7% of the vote, while Cavendish only received 41.5%. In May, Cavendish married Kit Kennedy at the Chelsea Town Hall's Register office in London. Kit Kennedy was also a part of the Kennedy curse, which is something we'll get into later. In August of 1944, Cavendish and his military unit, the 5th Battalion Coldstream Guards, engaged in fierce fighting in France in the Western Front of Europe's liberation from Nazi Germany. Earlier the next month, both Kennedy's unit crossed the Somme River and pushed east towards Brussels, the capital city of Belgium, which was under German occupation at the time. Sadly, on September 9, 1944, at the age of 26, William Cavendish was killed by a sniper while attempting to lead a company towards the town of Heppen, today known as Leopoldsburg, in Belgium, to liberate it from the hands of the infamous Waffen-SS. He was and remains buried at the Leopoldsburg War Cemetery in the same town. Cavendish played a part in liberating Europe from the hands of the Nazis, and his bravery should never be forgotten. Kathleen Agnes Kennedy, also nicknamed Kit Kennedy, was born on February 20, 1920, in Brookline, Massachusetts. She was given the nickname of Kit reportedly due to her impressionable nature. Throughout her early years in childhood, she attended school at the Riverdale Country School in the New York City borough of the Bronx, and the Norton Convent of the Sacred Heart in Connecticut, and the Holy Child Convent in the commune of Neuilly in France. When her father, Joe Sr., was appointed as U.S. Ambassador to Britain in 1938, Kathleen, alongside her father and other members of the family, moved to London. She then attended college there at the Queen's College, and thanks to her wit, nature, and status, she quickly attracted many friends in British high society, including a short-lived relationship with future economist and business executive David Rockefeller. By the time World War II broke out in 1939, Kathleen was staying at a family residence in southern France, and had to evacuate back to Britain with a friend of hers. Eventually, despite initial protests, she returned back to the United States with her family later that year. Eventually, Kathleen went back to school, attending Finch School in Manhattan, and then a commercial college in Florida. She also began to do volunteer work for the American Red Cross. In 1941, she left schooling altogether and began work as a research assistant for the executive editor of the now-defunct newspaper, the Washington Times-Herald, Frank Waldrop. She was eventually given her own column on the paper where she wrote reviews on plays and films. In 1943, she signed up to work for a Red Cross Center for American soldiers in Britain, using it as a way to return back into the country. During her work there, she began a relationship with the aforementioned William Cavendish. They were originally friends back when her father was ambassador, and had reunited by the time she returned to Britain. Eventually, despite objections from the family, especially her mother Rose, they were married in London in May of 1944. However, the marriage was short-lived. Cavendish would be killed by a sniper in Belgium in September of the same year, and Catherine was now a widow. Soon after, she began another relationship, this time with the 8th Earl Fitzwilliam, despite further objections from the family, including a warning from her mother that she would be cut off and disowned if they both married. Then, her life was cut short. On May 13, 1948, both Kathleen and Fitzwilliam were traveling on a plane from Paris to the French Riviera for a vacation. Their plane, which was a DH-104 Dove short-hauler airliner, took off from Paris at 3:30 p.m. local time. 1 hour into the flight, radio contact with the plane was lost when the plane was close to the center of a storm. For the next 20 minutes, the plane bounced up and down up to several thousand feet at a time. By the time the storm cleared, the plane was diving and moments away from impact, with little time left to prevent a crash. The pilot attempted to pull the plane up, but it was too late. The plane crashed at the Plateau du Cordillon, near the commune of Saint-Bazoul in southern France. Kathleen and Fitzwilliam, alongside both the plane's pilot and navigator, were killed instantly. He ended up being buried at the Cavendish family cemetery at St. Peter's Church, Edinburgh. Her father was the only member of the family to attend her funeral, with her mother Rose refusing to attend, instead checking into a hospital for medical reasons. Just a note before we get into her case, the name Arabella Kennedy was not her real name, and does not show up on any birth certificate. It was an informal name that her mother gave her after her death. Arabella Kennedy was born and died on the same day, August 23, 1956. She was the first daughter of then Senator John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jackie Kennedy. On that day, Jackie woke up to unexpected heavy bleeding and immediately rushed to the emergency room at Newport Hospital in Rhode Island. She delivered Arabella in an emergency C-section, but she was sadly stillborn, meaning Arabella had died inside of her mother's womb late into the pregnancy. Her father, John, who was not with Jackie at the time of the birth, was instead vacationing in the Mediterranean on a yacht. He was initially reluctant to return home when he heard the news, but then he took a flight back home after a friend of his, fellow Senator George Smathers, told him, quote, "You better haul your ass back to your wife if you ever want to run for president." Arabella was initially buried at a Catholic cemetery in Rhode Island before being reburied at Arlington National Cemetery after her father's death. Her headstone is simply marked as daughter, as Jackie didn't want to put on it an informal name that reportedly not even her husband was aware of. Like Arabella, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy's life would be incredibly short. He was born at Otis Air Force Base Hospital in the town of Bourne, Massachusetts via emergency C-section on August 7, 1963. He was born 5.5 weeks prematurely. Within minutes of his birth, Patrick had difficulty breathing and then developed symptoms of infant respiratory distress syndrome, also known as IRDS, back then known as hyaline membrane disease, also known as HMD. When his father John arrived from Air Force One, he asked for a chaplain to come to the hospital. Patrick was quickly baptized and given the name of Patrick Bouvier Kennedy. A specialist from Boston Children's Hospital, Dr. James Drarbot, was then flown into the AFB hospital to consult on the case. He recommended that the family to transfer to Boston. They were then rushed to the hospital via ambulance, which took an hour and a half, as the hospital was 70 miles away from Otis AFB Hospital. When the family arrived in Boston, all efforts were made to save his life. Back then, all that could be done for IRDS was to keep one's blood chemistry as close to normal as possible. A then experimental treatment known as hyperbaric oxygen therapy, also known as HBOT, was carried out, where Patrick was placed in a fully pressurized hyperbaric chamber. However, it ended up being in vain. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy died 2 days later, on August 9, 1963, at 4:04 a.m. Eastern Time. He was exactly 39 hours and 12 minutes old. Beside the chamber that had Patrick inside was his father John and his uncle Robert Kennedy. His mother was still recovering from the C-section at the time of his death, and was informed of it by the doctor who carried out the birth. The next day, a small funeral was held at the private chapel of Boston Cardinal Richard Cushing. He was initially buried at Hollywood Cemetery at his father's town of Brookline, but like his stillborn sister, was moved to Arlington National Cemetery after his father died over 3 months later. Patrick Kennedy's death and the publicity surrounding it led to further public awareness interest, and research into IRDS, inspiring further development of ventilators, blood gas tests, and intensive care practices for newborns in both the United States and Europe.
The flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
If you haven't noticed by now, for each person affected by the curse, I tried my best to briefly describe their lives before the incident that affected them or ended their life. But since President John F. Kennedy is an uber-famous figure in American political history, I'm going to skip through all that and go straight to the day of his murder, November 22nd, 1963. President Kennedy had decided to visit Texas on that day to informally launch his re-election bid for the 1964 election and to solve a dispute between the state's Democratic Party, mainly between the liberal Senator Ralph Yarborough and the more conservative Governor John B. Connally. JFK and his wife Jackie Kennedy arrived late from the previous night at Air Force One at the Hotel Texas, today known as the Hilton Fort Worth. The next morning, JFK gave a scheduled speech at the hotel's ballroom before departing to the hotel for Carswell Air Force Base, where Air Force One was waiting for them. When the couple arrived and boarded the plane, it took off for Dallas Love Field in nearby Dallas, Texas. A few minutes before they arrived, Air Force Two, the palatial plane of the Vice President, arrived at the same field before Air Force One had arrived. After arriving, the Kennedy couple shook hands with supporters for about 15 minutes before departing from Love Field to take the planned 10-mile trip through downtown Dallas. After progressing through Main Street, the motorcade containing the Kennedys and the couple of John and Nellie Connally entered Dealey Plaza, and then approached the Texas School Book Depository, where JFK's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was waiting for them. At 12:30 p.m. Central Time, that's when the shots rang out. Witnesses recalled when the first shot was fired when Kennedy was waving with his right hand. Then he had his mouth wide open, seemingly in pain and anguish. He was then hit with a second bullet, which went through his throat, exiting and impacting Governor Connally from behind as well. Then, as he turned left to see his wife, the sure third shot was fired, hitting Kennedy's head and causing it to literally explode. The motorcade began to speed up, and Jackie began to climb up the motorcade in terror. The Connollys later testified that they heard Jackie say, quote, "I have his brains in my hand." The motorcade's driver and the police motorcycles accompanying them then turned their sirens on, going 80 miles per hour to the closest hospital, that being Parkland Hospital, 4 miles away. 6 minutes later, the motorcade arrived at the hospital, and both Kennedy and Connally were admitted and began to be treated. All doctors attending the president did their best to save his life, performing CPR and a tracheotomy. However, all efforts were futile. 24 minutes later, and at 1 p.m. Central Time, the last rites of the Catholic Church were administered, and President Kennedy was pronounced dead. He was only 46 years old. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who was now President Johnson, left the hospital and arrived back at Love Field, where Air Force One was still stationed. At 2:38 p.m. Central Time, Johnson, alongside a bloody Jackie Kennedy, took the oath of office and was officially proclaimed as the 36th President of the United States. The oath was administered by federal judge Sarah Hughes. Oswald, for his part, later killed police officer J.D. Tippit while on the run, and was captured later that day while hiding out inside of a theater. He attempted to resist his arrest, yelling out, quote, "Well, it's all over now," then punching and attempting to shoot another police officer. He was later charged for President Kennedy's murder later that night. 2 days later, Oswald himself would be assassinated on live television by club owner and alleged mafia associate Jack Ruby. Ruby himself would later die from cancer while in prison in 1967. President Kennedy's death was and remains one of the most shocking events in American history, having left an impact on American politics and turning him into an icon of the 1960s, being remembered as a charismatic and beloved leader who fought to pursue change for the people of America. He still consistently ranks as the most popular post-World War II president to this day, leaving a legacy that will never be forgotten. Just like JFK, Senator Robert F. Kennedy was and still is an uber-famous figure in American politics. So we're going to skip his life and background and go straight to the day where his life was cut short. June 5th, 1968. Previous night, the California and South Dakota Democratic presidential primaries were held, in the pivotal fight for the Democratic nomination for the 1968 presidential election. After incumbent President Lyndon Johnson dropped out of the race after a near loss in New Hampshire, the race was a three-way battle between Kennedy, incumbent Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy. The California primary was a pivotal race to see who would remain in contention for the nomination. Humphrey was not on the ballot in the race, so it was a two-way battle between Kennedy and McCarthy in California. When the results were in, RFK won the primary with 46% of the vote, compared to McCarthy's 42%. Since the state was winner-take-all, that meant that RFK won all 172 primary delegates, leaving him in a strong position for the nomination, albeit in second place with 393.5 delegates, trailing behind Vice President Humphrey, who had 561.5 delegates in his hand. At midnight the next day, RFK gave his victory speech to a jubilant crowd at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. For 8 minutes, he spoke to the crowd before ending his speech with the words, "So my thanks to all of you, and on to Chicago, and let's win there." Soon after he finished his speech, Kennedy attempted to exit the hotel via the ballroom before he was informed that the route had changed, and that they were going to exit via the hotel kitchen. Campaign aides and guards attempted to clear a way for Kennedy to exit, but they were surrounded by a crowd of supporters the entire time. Within the crowd would be his assassin, Sirhan, a 24-year-old man who had been motivated by his anger at RFK's support for Israel in the Six-Day War. He was standing by an ice machine, and when he saw Kennedy, he rushed through and fired a .22 caliber Cadet revolver at Kennedy at point-blank range. As Kennedy fell onto the floor, others attempted to disarm Sirhan, who continued to shoot in random directions. 5 other individuals were injured in the incident, those being ABC News Director William Weisel, UAW Vice President Paul Schrade, party activist Elizabeth Evans, news reporter Ira Goldstein, and campaign volunteer Erwin Stroll. RFK then asked busboy Juan Romero, who he had been shaking hands with before he was shot, quote, "Is everybody okay?" Romero responded with, "Yes, everything's okay." Kennedy's wife Ethel, who was away at the time of the shooting, then arrived at the scene and knelt beside her husband. His campaign manager, brother-in-law Stephen Edward Smith, then asked for a doctor. Attendants then arrived, placed Kennedy on a stretcher, and took him to the Central Receiving Hospital. Doctors attempted to massage his heart to keep his heart beating, and with another slap in his face telling him, "Bob, Bob, Bob." 30 minutes later, he was transferred to the Good Samaritan Hospital, and a nearby gym was set up as a place where the press can get around-the-clock updates on his condition. As it turned out, Kennedy had been shot multiple times, with the fatal shot entering behind his right ear. Despite the hospital's efforts, Kennedy couldn't have been saved. At 1:44 a.m. Pacific time the next day, June 6th, Robert F. Kennedy passed away. He was 42 years old. His death sent shockwaves across the nation, with billions mourning his loss. Like his brother, Robert Kennedy had been a voice for change and the future, and he was sadly taken away too soon. Famously, at his funeral 2 days later on June 8th, during his eulogy, his younger brother, fellow Senator Ted Kennedy, famously proclaimed of his brother,
"My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. As he said many times in many parts of this nation, to those he touched and who sought to touch him, some men see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not."
For his part, Sirhan would face trial for the murder. He originally pleaded not guilty to the charges, which included illegal possession of a firearm, but would attempt to withdraw that plea and change it to guilty on all charges in an attempt to get life imprisonment instead of the maximum punishment of the death penalty. The trial wouldn't begin until February of 1969, and would last for 2 months until he was convicted on all charges in April. The sentence was the death penalty, but it was commuted to life in prison after a California Supreme Court ruling in 1972 ruled the death penalty as unconstitutional. Sirhan and his attorneys would submit appeal after appeal, including a motion to move the case from Los Angeles to the city of Fresno, California, but were all denied. Robert F. Kennedy is remembered today as a man who constantly fought for the poor and downtrodden, always fighting for what is right, from civil rights to calling for the end of the Vietnam War. He is arguably one of the most idolized politicians of the 20th century, and many still wonder today on how a hypothetical RFK presidency would play out. He was, and still remains, one of the most famous icons of the 1960s, and a man who will always be remembered. Just like his brothers, I will skip Ted Kennedy's backstory, as not only he is another famous figure in American politics, but there are two instances of the curse that are tied to him. Let's start with the first one. On June 19, 1964, Senator Kennedy was on a plane from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Massachusetts to accept his renomination for re-election to a full term in the Senate at a Massachusetts Democratic Party convention. He was expected to be there earlier that day, but was delayed due to a civil rights vote. Alongside him inside that plane were one of his trusted aides, Edward Moss, fellow Senator Birch Baugh, who was expected to speak at the convention, and his wife Marvella Baugh. Their destination was at the Barnes Municipal Airport in Westfield, Massachusetts. Approaching the airport, the plane suddenly climbed steeply, the inside shaking violently, before plunging and crashing at a nearby apple orchard. Senator Baugh was the first to climb out of the plane, helping his wife escape via an open escape hatch. Then, Baugh helped Kennedy out of the plane after the latter gained his attention. The Baugh couple then attracted the attention of a nearby driver who had been attracted by the sound of the plane crash. The driver took the Baughs home, called the police, then returned right back to retrieve Ted. In the crash, Ted Kennedy had suffered from 2 fractured ribs, 3 broken vertebrae, a punctured lung, internal bleeding, and a variety of cuts and bruises. The Baugh couple suffered minor injuries, but Senate aide Edward Moss and the plane's pilot had both sadly died in the crash. He would spend months recovering as his wife Joan Bennett Kennedy handled his re-election campaign for him. He would return to the Senate in January of 1965. For the next few years, Kennedy would continue his work in the Senate and was briefly considered as a presidential candidate in 1968 after his brother Robert was assassinated. However, a car accident the next year would forever damage his career prospects. On the night of July 18, 1969, at Chappaquiddick Island in Massachusetts, Kennedy, who was reportedly drunk after a night of partying after a boat race, gave Mary Jo Kopechne, a campaign aide who was one of the 6 Boiler Room girls who worked with his brother Robert's 1968 campaign for president, a ride back to her hotel at 11:15 p.m. that night. Kopechne had told no one else of her plans and had even left her home keys and purse at the party. The exact time of the crash is unknown due to conflicting testimony. According to Kennedy, he had made a wrong turn onto an unpaved road, which caused the crash. According to a deputy sheriff, he saw a man, that being Kennedy, make that turn onto the unpaved road and speed off when he approached and offered them help to their destination. What is clear, though, is that when Kennedy had approached the bridge connecting to the road, which did not have guardrails at the time, he pushed on the brakes, lost control of the car, drove off the bridge on its other end, flipping over, and rested it on its roofs in 6 to 8 feet of water. Kennedy managed to swim out of the car, but Kopechne did not. She would later die in the car, drowning from all the water. According to Kennedy, he had tried to rescue her numerous times, but they were unable to do so. He then returned to the party and ordered a couple other guests to the side of the crash. They tried to rescue her too, but to no avail. Despite their insistence, Kennedy would not report the crash until early the next morning. It wouldn't be until 8 a.m. on July 19th that the car with the dead Kopechne would be found by a man and his son, who were out on a day of fishing. Authorities would arrive 45 minutes later. Kopechne's cause of death would be disputed, with some claiming she had died of suffocation. Regardless, the outcome was the same. Kennedy would manage to avoid a charge of manslaughter related to the accident, but when he was arraigned in a court hearing next week on July 25, where he would plead guilty to the charge of leaving the scene of an accident causing bodily injury, his team of lawyers argued that he should receive a suspended jail sentence, citing his age, character, and reputation. He would receive a suspended sentence of 2 months in jail, in addition to a full year of probation. Despite these consequences, the effect on his career would be more minor than expected. Despite his chances at winning the presidency being crushed, he would still cruise to re-election the next year in 1970, with 62% of the vote, which is still a lot, albeit less than the 74% he received in 1964. Ted Kennedy would go on to have a long and successful career in the Senate, serving all the way until his death in 2009, at the age of 77. By that time, Chappaquiddick had been largely forgotten. Although Kennedy had many character flaws, he is primarily remembered as a man with excellent legislative skills, noted for his effectiveness in working across the aisle whenever needed, and the list of pieces of legislation he managed to help pass, including the infamous, or famous, No Child Left Behind Act. Today, Kennedy is remembered as a respected and successful statesman, despite his many flaws, and will likely be remembered that way in the years to come. Joseph Patrick Kennedy II was born on September 24, 1952 in Boston, Massachusetts, specifically in the neighborhood of Brighton. He is the second child and first son of Robert and Ethel Kennedy. As a child, Joe II seemed to have a very troubled youth, and was reportedly expelled from multiple private schools due to his explosive temper. His father would be assassinated while he was 15 years old. Later on, Joe II would also drop out from the boarding school known as the Milton Academy due to his request to take time off to work for his uncle Ted Kennedy's re-election bid in 1970, having been declined. He finished high school at the private school known as Manor Hall in 1972. The next year, he would be involved in a major car accident. On August 13, 1973, Joe II would get into a car accident while driving a Jeep at Nantucket Island in Massachusetts. While he was reportedly driving at 15 miles per hour, he accelerated and swerved to avoid hitting the car, and his own car would end up flipping over and crashing. While Joe was seemingly uninjured in the wreck, his younger brother David Kennedy would be injured in the crash, as well as two female passengers. One of those passengers, 18-year-old Pamela Kelly, would be paralyzed from the waist down. She would never be able to walk again, and would die in November of 2020 at the age of 65. As Joe was the driver in the accident, he would have ended up being charged for the crash, but would plead not guilty and would not testify during the case. He would end up being convicted and issued a sentence of a $100 fine, or $725 in today's money. After the accident, Joseph Kennedy II would go on to have a successful career, which can't be said for many others here. He founded the nonprofit organization known as the Citizen Energy Corporation, which is known today as an advocate for renewable energy. He would also go on to serve 6 terms in Congress, serving in the House of Representatives from 1987 to 1999. As of the writing of this video, he is currently still alive at the age of 72. One of his children, Joseph Kennedy III, would go on to serve in the House from 2013 to 2021, as well as Special Envoy to Northern Ireland in the Biden administration. Edward Moore Kennedy Jr. was born on September 26, 1961 in Boston, Massachusetts. He is the middle child of the aforementioned Ted Kennedy and his first wife, Joan Bennett Kennedy. He would attend a boarding school known as the St. Albans School in Washington, D.C. During that time, however, he would go through an event at a young age that would change his life. In November of 1973, with the exact date unknown, Ted Jr. would be diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a form of bone cancer. And after a week of chemotherapy had proven to be ineffective, doctors decided that an amputation would be necessary to stop the cancer. On November 17, 1973, that operation would be carried out. Although the cancer was found to be below the knee, an above-the-knee amputation would be carried out in order to stop the cancer from spreading further. The procedure was reportedly carried out in an hour, and Ted Jr. would recover from the operation without much issue. He would later be fitted with an at-the-time revolutionary prosthetic leg in 1985. 12 years after the cancer scare. After this short battle, Ted Jr. would go on to have a successful career in law and politics. After graduating from college, he would work at a law firm that specializes in people with disabilities in New Haven, Connecticut. He also serves as the chairman of the American Association of People with Disabilities, a nonprofit advocacy group for people with disabilities. He would also go on to serve a couple terms in the Connecticut State Senate from 2015 to 2019. Before retiring from politics altogether. At the time of writing, he is still alive at 63 years old with a wife and 2 children. David Anthony Kennedy was born on June 15, 1955 in Washington, D.C. He is the fourth child of the aforementioned Robert and Ethel Kennedy. There is not a lot of information on his education, although it is known that he did attend Harvard University for a time before dropping out in 1976. David unfortunately witnessed his father be murdered live on television in 1968, with the trauma surrounding the event causing him to develop a drug addiction. A car accident involving him and his older brother Joseph Kennedy II in 1973 further fueled the addiction. After leaving school, he alternated between a family-owned home in McLean, Virginia, and New York City, before deciding to live full-time in NYC in 1979. During his time there, he was known as a party boy who spent time in Manhattan nightclubs with the company of women. He also went and pursued a career of journalism, first working for a newspaper in Tennessee, before working for the Atlantic Monthly magazine in 1982. During that time, his drug addiction had spiraled out of control. He was hospitalized twice in 1976 and 1978 due to other drug overdoses, and was once diagnosed with bacterial endocarditis, which is heart inflammation usually associated with drug use. He was also once robbed and assaulted in 1979 in a drug deal gone wrong. During this time, he moved through various rehab centers in an effort to get clean, going from Sussex, England, to Sacramento, California, and to Boston, Massachusetts over the next few years. His efforts were met with decent success, even re-enrolling back in Harvard for the 1983 fall semester, before sadly dropping out at the end of said semester due to relapsing back to his drug addiction. On April 19, 1984, David traveled down to Palm Beach, Florida for an extended Easter vacation with his family, checking into the Brazilian Court Hotel. For the first 2 days, he was out partying, but then suddenly vanished without notice. For the next several days, he was unable to be contacted. Due to concern from his family, hotel staff did check in his room on April 25, 1984. The staff then found David Kennedy dead on the floor. As it turned out, he had overdosed on a concoction of drugs, those being cocaine, Demerol, and Millerol. He was only 28 years old. He would be buried 2 days later, on April 27, at the family plot at the Hollywood Cemetery in Brookline, Massachusetts. He had never married, and had therefore never had any children. Michael Lemoyne Kennedy was born on February 27, 1958 in Washington, D.C., as a son of Robert and Ethel Kennedy. There's not much known about his childhood, although it is known that during his early years, he typically lived between 2 family-owned homes in McLean, Virginia, and Hyannisport, Massachusetts. There is also little known about his education, although it is known that he graduated from Harvard College in 1980, got his law degree at the University of Virginia School of Law in 1984, and was admitted to the Massachusetts State Bar the next year. During that time, he also dated and married Victoria Gifford, daughter of former NFL player Frank Gifford. During their marriage, they had 3 children, those being Michael Kennedy Jr., Kyle Kennedy, and Rory Gifford Kennedy. For a time being, Michael had briefly worked as an attorney in Boston before taking over as chairman of the Citizen Energy Corporation, which was founded by his older brother Joseph Kennedy II, who stepped down after being elected to Congress. Under Michael's leadership, the nonprofit organization expanded their operations to include providing discounted medications to uninsured individuals who were suffering from AIDS. He also chaired a group dedicated to preserving Concord's Walden Pond, and co-founded the organization Stop Handgun Violence, a group that advocated for gun control. He was first considered as a potential political candidate in Massachusetts after successfully chairing his uncle Ted Kennedy's re-election bid to the Senate in 1994, which was the toughest in his Senate career due to a strong opponent and then businessman Mitt Romney. However, a scandal would break out that would end those prospects. In 1997, news broke of allegations of Michael having an affair with the babysitter of his children, which allegedly began when she was only 14 years old, while Michael was in his late 30s. He later took polygraph tests arranged by his attorneys, where he claimed that he did not have sex with the babysitter until she was 16 years old, which was Massachusetts' age of consent at the time. Soon after, he and his wife separated, and an investigation into allegations of statutory rape began, although it was surprisingly later dropped. The scandal also impacted his older brother Joe II, who had to end a long-planned bid for governor of Massachusetts in 1998 due to the scandal. According to observers, though the alleged affair ended Michael's political prospects. Sadly, his life would be cut short as well. On New Year's Eve of 1997, Michael Kennedy and his family were out skiing on Aspen Mountain in the state of Colorado. He had not been wearing any safety equipment while skiing and was repeatedly told off and ordered to do so by ski patrollers. He had been playing football with some of his family while skiing, and he would end up hitting a tree in the process. After the incident, Michael would be taken to Aspen Valley Hospital, where it would be declared dead not long after. He was 39 years old. He would soon be interred at the Kennedy family plot, Hollywood Cemetery in Brookline, Massachusetts. As the turn of the millennium inched closer, another tragedy would soon hit the family. John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. was born on November 25, 1960 in Washington, D.C., over 3 weeks after his father won the presidency. He lived his first 3 years of his life at the White House until his father was assassinated in 1963. At his funeral, JFK Jr., also known by his nickname John John, famously saluted his father when the carriage carrying his father was moving out of the St. Matthew's Cathedral. He and his family then moved to the D.C. neighborhood of Georgetown for a time before settling in Manhattan's Upper East Side for the rest of his childhood. While in Manhattan, John John first attended school at the boys' school known as the St. David's School, before moving to a private school known as the Collegiate School, before moving and graduating from the Preparatory Phillips Academy in Massachusetts. After school, John John went on trips with some of his family, first with his mother to Africa, and then with a cousin to an earthquake disaster zone in Guatemala, where he reportedly helped with food distribution and heavy building work. He then made his first public address at Boston's JFK Library and Museum in 1979, reciting a poem written by poet Stephen Spender titled, "I Think Continually of Those Who Were Truly Great." John John then went to college, majoring in American Studies at Brown University. During this time there, he co-founded a student group dedicated to talking about the issues of the era, from apartheid to civil rights. He grew to be against apartheid after visiting South Africa during a summer break and met with UN Ambassador Andrew Young to speak about it at his university. He graduated from Brown in 1983, then visiting India and attending the University of Delhi, doing postgraduate work and meeting with the Catholic icon Mother Teresa. The next year, after the 1984 Democratic Convention, John John went back to New York to work at the Office of Business Development for the next few years. In 1988, he then worked as a summer legal associate for the Los Angeles law firm Manat, Phelps, Rotenberg, and Phillips, where he worked for Charles Manat, who was Ted Kennedy's roommate in law school and former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. That same year, he entered into the political sphere, making his debut at the 1988 DNC in Atlanta, where he gave a short speech introducing his uncle, the aforementioned Ted Kennedy. He then campaigned for his cousin Patrick Kennedy in the same year, again in 1994, then for his uncle Ted in his 1994 re-election bid to the Senate. During that time, John John headed the nonprofit group Headed Up, where it focused on providing opportunities to those with disabilities. He then earned himself a law degree at the New York University School of Law in 1989, and passed the New York State Bar exam on his third attempt in 1990 after failing his first 2 attempts. He then got a job as an assistant district attorney for the next 4 years at the Manhattan DA's office. He then worked as a journalist for a time in 1992. In 1995, John John, with his friend, businessman Michael Berman, founded the magazine known as George, a magazine which focused on lifestyles, politics, and fashion that was issued once per month. Although it started off with a splash, the magazine would struggle, and by 1997 both John John and Berman were locked in an internal power struggle, which led to the latter's departure and a decline in sales. The magazine would later shut down in 2001, 2 years after John John's untimely death. During this entire time, his love life was also active, dating many high-profile figures thanks to his fame, ranging from actresses Sarah Jessica Parker and Brooke Shields to model Cindy Crawford. However, he privately married fashion publicist Carolyn Bessette in 1996, with her becoming the subject of media speculation and scrutiny thanks to her husband's fame. Despite constant requests for privacy by the couple, the media attention persisted, which led to the couple seeking marriage counseling beginning in March of 1999. However, before the couple were able to seek guidance, John John's life would be tragically cut short. On July 16, 1999, John John was set to travel with his wife Carolyn and her sister Lauren Bessette to Hyannisport, Massachusetts to attend the wedding of his cousin, Wari Kennedy. They would take off from Essex County Airport in New Jersey, arrive at Martha's Vineyard Airport to drop off Lauren, and then finally arrive at the Barnstable Municipal Airport. They were set to fly in a Piper Saratoga plane where John would be the pilot himself, given that he had a pilot's license. The first part of the plan went over well, with the plane taking off from Essex at 8:38 p.m. Eastern Time. However, over an hour later, the plane would crash into the Atlantic Ocean. The crash would kill JFK Jr., Carolyn Bessette, and sister Lauren instantly. John was 39 years old. His failure to arrive quickly sparked concern, and by early the next morning, the family reported to the Ghost Card Air Station in Cape Cod that the plane had failed to arrive. Search and rescue missions would soon begin. The search would last for a few days before some of the plane's remnants were found on July 19th, with the remains of all three individuals being found on the 21st. It was later found in an autopsy that all three had died on impact. Their remains would be collected and cremated. The next day, their remains would be sprinkled into the Atlantic Ocean. John F. Kennedy Jr. is remembered as a man who lived with grace and respect, as America's reluctant prince, thanks to being the only son of the beloved 35th president. His uncle Ted once said of John, quote, "We dared to think, in the other Irish phase, that this John Kennedy would live to grow gray hair, with his beloved Carolyn by his side. But like his father, he had every gift but length of years." In 2003, the Arco Forum at the Harvard Kennedy School was renamed to the JFK Jr. Forum of Public Affairs, and a made-for-TV biographical film titled America's Prince, the John F. Kennedy Jr. story, was released that year. 26 years after his death, his memory remains in the minds of many, as his story is one of triumph, tragedy, and success. Patrick Joseph Kennedy II was born on July 14, 1967 in Boston, Massachusetts. He is the youngest son of Ted and Joan Kennedy. There's not a lot known about his early life and education, although it is known that he received his education at the aforementioned Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, graduating from there in 1986. He then attended Providence College, a Catholic university in Providence, Rhode Island, graduating with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1991. However, during his junior year at Providence, Patrick decided to enter the world of politics at a very early age. He ran for a seat at the Rhode Island House of Representatives in the 9th District, first defeating five-term incumbent John Skeffington Jr. for the Democratic nomination, and then winning the general election altogether. He is the youngest member of the Kennedy clan to win public office, doing so at just 21 years old. He would serve 2 terms before retiring from the seat in 1993. He would then launch a campaign for Congress in 1994. Running in Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District, which was vacated by retiring GOP Congressman Ronald Matchley. Patrick would go on to win the general election by 9 points, becoming one of the few Democrats to flip a Republican seat in the 1994 Republican Revolution, where the GOP flipped both houses of Congress. He is also the first member of Generation X to be elected into Congress, at the age of 27. He would go on to serve in that seat until 2011, where he retired from politics altogether. During his time in Congress, Patrick co-sponsored multiple meaningful pieces of legislation, including the Combat PTSD Act, the Foundations for Learning Act, the Positive Aging Act, among others. He was also a member of many congressional caucuses, including the vice chairman of the Native American Caucus and co-founding both the Down Syndrome Caucus and the 21st Century Healthcare Caucus. Thanks to his name, his career, his accomplishments, and status, Patrick was a big player in the Rhode Island Democratic Party, as well as in the National Party to a smaller extent, and could have easily had a longer career in politics. But a late-night incident in 2006 would change his fortunes, and ultimately, his life. At 2:45 a.m. on May 4, 2006, Patrick Kennedy crashed his car, which was a Ford Mustang, into the barricade at the D.C. neighborhood of Capitol Hill. A U.S. Capitol police officer who arrived at the scene would describe him as intoxicated at the crash site. According to Patrick, he had been disoriented from the nausea/sleeping medication Ambien and antihistamine Farragut, although other accounts recall him allegedly drinking at a nearby bar earlier that night. He also stated to officers that he was, quote, late for a vote, which was a lie, since the last vote of that day took place 6 hours prior to the crash. A field sobriety test was not done at the scene, and Patrick was taken back home by another officer. The next day, he had stated that he indeed had a medication addiction and was admitting himself to rehab at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He was endorsed by the Rhode Island Democrats once again a few days later as a show of support, and would be released from rehab the next month. Patrick would face charges for the accident, being charged with driving under the influence of prescription drugs, in which he struck up a deal with prosecutors to avoid possible jail time. Patrick Kennedy was sentenced to a fine of $350 and was ordered to attend a rehab program that included urine tests, meetings with a probation officer twice a week, near-daily Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and other activities. He would enter rehab again in 2009 and had stated in 2018 that he had been addiction-free and sober for the past 6 years. After his accident and retirement from Congress, Patrick has become a mental health advocate, calling for a stronger care system for mental health in the U.S. He would promote further study into brain diseases and co-founded a mental health nonprofit known as the Kennedy Forum in 2013. He would benefit greatly from the first Trump administration's billion-dollar response to the U.S. opioid crisis, and reportedly sits on the boards of multiple companies working with the U.S. government's response to the opioid crisis. In 2016, Patrick teamed up with former policy advisor and TV personality Van Jones and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich to found the group Advocates for Opioid Recovery. His love life also flourished, marrying schoolteacher Amy Savell in 2011 and having 4 children with her. At the time of writing this video, Patrick Kennedy is 57 years old and is living a quieter life with his large family in Binghamton, New Jersey. Kara Ann Kennedy was born on February 27, 1960 in Bronxville, New York. She was the oldest child of the aforementioned Ted and Joan Kennedy. She would spend her childhood in between family-owned residences in Cape Cod and McLean, Virginia. She received her education first at the National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C., and then at the Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. After graduating from the former in 1978, she would spend time working for her father's failed 1980 presidential campaign before attending and later graduating from Tufts University in 1983. Kara then pursued a career in film and television, working in New York before landing a spot for the producer for television show Evening Magazine at Boston television station WBZ. She also helped produce films for the organization Very Special Arts, today known as VSA Arts, which was founded by her aunt Jean Kennedy Smith. Her work, which was designed to encourage disabled individuals to participate, was met with decent success, including a film focusing on Chris Burke, an actor diagnosed with Down syndrome who starred in the ABC sitcom known as Life Goes On. Kara also served as an honorary director and trustee to the JFK Library Foundation, a nonprofit that provides staffing and resources to Boston's JFK Library and Museum. She also volunteered at Washington, D.C.'s Sibley Hospital, serving women in D.C.'s N Street Village. In addition to her working positions, she also served as a board member at the EMK Institute for the United States Senate, producing a film for the organization at its groundbreaking event. In addition, Kara also spent time as a reading tutor and was prepared to join an organization known as the Board of Reading Parents at the time of her untimely death. When it comes to her personal life, Kara had an 11-year-long marriage with Michael Allen, a Rhode Island real estate developer, first married in 1990 and having 2 children with them, those being Grace Elizabeth Allen and Max Greyhouse Allen. They divorced in 2001. The next year, Kara would be diagnosed with lung cancer, which was originally said to be inoperable. But Kara, with the help of her dad, found a surgeon at Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital, who was willing to remove a part of her right lung to save her life. She agreed, and the operation was a success, with the cancer being neutralized and Kara returning to her life soon after. However, her life would be cut short years later. On September 16, 2011, at the Sports and Health Fitness Club in Washington, D.C., Kara Kennedy was doing her daily workout when she suddenly collapsed. She would die soon after. She was only 51 years old. It was suspected that her body was weakened from an earlier battle with lung cancer and that her body had given out that day. She was reportedly interned at the Kennedy family plot at the aforementioned Hollywood Cemetery in Brookline, Massachusetts, next to her grandparents, Rose and Joseph Kennedy Sr. She left behind 2 children and a large extended family. This story is arguably the saddest of the ones covered. Mary Kathleen Richardson was born on October 4, 1959 in Bayonne, New Jersey, and raised in the city of Hoboken, New Jersey. She was the daughter of both a school teacher and college professor. Her first connection to the Kennedy family was at the Putney School in Vermont, where she met Carrie Kennedy, daughter of the aforementioned Robert and Ethel Kennedy. They would become close friends and would be roommates in both high school and college, specifically at Brown University in Rhode Island. Mary would graduate from Brown and later study architecture design at the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD for short. From 1979 to 1980, she would work for the famed artist and film producer Andy Warhol, and would raise donations from his and the artwork of other artists. She then worked as a model for famed fashion designer William Blass for a time. After studying at RISD, Mary lived in Manhattan's Soho neighborhood in the 1980s and was reportedly active in the culture known as Bohemianism. She then continued her career in architecture in the 90s, working for the fashion firm Parrish Henley Design as a designer, and was involved in the renovation of the Naval Observatory, the official home of the U.S. Vice President. She was also involved in practices related to green building and was certified to do so via the LEED, or the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design program. In 1998, she helped co-found the nonprofit organization known as the Food Allergy Initiative, which is today the largest private fund for research into food allergies in the United States. Her love life also played a factor in her life. For a while in the 1980s, she dated a man named Carlos Marvillon, a descendant from a Greek shipping family. However, in 1994, she married a man that might sound very familiar to you. That man is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., an attorney, environmental activist, and future Secretary of Health and Human Services. He is the second eldest child of RFK Sr. and a brother to her close friend Carrie. They would go on to have 4 children together, those being Connor Kennedy, Tyler Lemoyne Kennedy, Finn Kennedy, and Aiden Kennedy. During their 16-year-long marriage, RFK Jr. was known to be a compulsive womanizer who had sent nude photos of young women to his friends and had allegedly sexually assaulted a family babysitter named Eliza Coney in the late 1990s. Their marriage was never perfect, but it would be until the late 2000s where the marriage and her life would begin to crumble apart. In 2007, it was reported that Kennedy had called the police on Richardson twice, worried that she may try to hurt herself. In May of 2010, Kennedy would file for divorce from his wife, Richardson would be arrested for DUI, and police would be summoned over 2 alleged domestic incidents at their home, all on the same week. Her alcohol addiction grew worse as divorce proceedings turned nasty. She was soon reportedly no longer welcome at the Kennedy compound. By Christmas of 2011, Richardson had made attempts to reconcile with RFK Jr., but it was futile, as the latter was already seeing another woman, that being actress Cheryl Hines. She had also reportedly told a friend, quote, "It's not easy to divorce a Kennedy." In the final weeks of her life, however, she seemed to be getting better, making more public appearances, including at a friend's birthday party. However, those appearances truly were appearances, and the next year, she would sadly succumb to her demons. On May 16, 2012, Mary Richardson Kennedy was found dead at her home in New York, with it being ruled as a suicide via hanging. She was only 52 years old. An autopsy also found that she had antidepressant medication in her system at the time of her suicide, which, according to her family, is from a lifelong battle with depression. It was later reported that before her suicide, Richardson found a diary of RFK Jr., in which he depicted 37 sexual encounters with other women in 1 year, that being 2001. She asked family members for it to be released to the press if something were to happen to her. 2 memorial services were held in her memory, the first by the Kennedys at Bedford, New York's St. Patrick's Catholic Church, and the second by the Richardsons at Manhattan's Standard Hotel. A legal battle between RFK Jr. and Richardson's brother, Thomas Richardson, ensued over who would remain in charge of her remains. Kennedy won the battle, and Richardson would be buried beside his aunt Eunice Kennedy Shriver and uncle Sergeant Shriver at the St. Francis Xavier Cemetery in Massachusetts. Her body was then moved to an empty plot days later, by the orders of her husband. Mary Kennedy was a woman who still had a future ahead of her, and thanks in part to her husband's consistent womanizing and her lifelong battles with her mental health, is some of the reasons to why her untimely death took place. Sosha Kennedy Hill was born on May 22, 1997 in Washington, D.C., as the only child of Courtney Kennedy and Paul Michael Hill. She was a granddaughter of the late Robert F. Kennedy. In her early years, Hill typically lived between both New York City and the country of Ireland, with her family moving to the latter when she was just 4 years old. However, they moved back into the U.S. later in her life, moving between DC and Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and spent summers at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. Hill had received her education at the boarding school Dayfield Academy in Deerfield, Massachusetts. However, that is when her mental health took a turn for the worse, starting with a battle with depression. In a 2016 article for the Academy student newspaper, Hill wrote, quote, "My depression took root in the beginning of my middle school years, and will be with me for the rest of my life. Although I was a happy child, I suffered bouts of deep sadness that felt like a heavy boulder on my chest." The depression would become worse during her sophomore year of high school, as she would write that her depression would relax during summer break, but return in the fall. It got so bad that she had reportedly attempted suicide, and had checked herself into a treatment facility. Her struggle with mental health would also inspire inside her a passion for activism. She would start a school group titled the Deerfield Students Against Sexual Assault, participated in a March for Our Lives rally in 2018, and when she left for Boston College in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, she had joined the College Democrats and became its vice president. She would also begin to fight to dismantle the stigma surrounding the discourse surrounding mental health. However, the battle became too much for her, and like Mary Kennedy before her, she would sadly succumb to those struggles, but in an unexpected way. On August 1st, 2019, Socia Kennedy Hill had unexpectedly been found unresponsive at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. According to family and friends, she was taken to Cape Cod Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. She was only 22 years old. She has been remembered as a woman who was fierce, determined, and full of love for her family and a desire for justice. Her grandmother, Ethel Kennedy, said of her passing, quote, "Our hearts were shattered by the loss of our beloved Socia. Her life was filled with hope, promise, and love. The world is a little less beautiful today." She would be buried at the aforementioned St. Francis Xavier Cemetery in Massachusetts, not far from the Kennedy compound. Her death certificate, which was released 3 months later, stated that she had died from an accidental overdose, with toxicity coming from methadone, diazepam, and ethanol, alongside other substances being found in her system, according to a toxicology report. Like many other Americans whose lives were lost to an overdose, Socia Kennedy Hill is yet another example of a person with a long, bright future ahead of them, but their struggles sadly got the best of them. Maeve Kennedy Townsend was born on November 1st, 1979, in New Haven, Connecticut, to Kathleen Kennedy and David Lee Townsend. The former was a one-time lieutenant governor of Maryland, while the latter was a college professor. Kennedy had first received her education within the Baltimore County Public School System and later at the preparatory St. Paul School for Girls in Brooklynville, Maryland, graduating from the latter in 1997. She then became an undergraduate at the aforementioned Boston College. During that time, she worked 2 part-time jobs and studied abroad in Ireland. She later graduated from Georgetown University, received her law degree at the university's Law Center, as well as a Foreign Service degree at the university's Walsh School of Foreign Service. In her adulthood, Kennedy first volunteered for the Peace Corps in the country of Mozambique, later returning to the U.S. to work for her mother's failed bid for Maryland governor in 2002. She later served in the Obama administration as a senior advisor at the State Department's Global AIDS Program and at the HHS Department's Office of Global Affairs, leading teams on issues such as human rights and the health of women and children. She also entered a relationship and got married with David McKean in 2009, taking the name of Maeve Kennedy McKean. During that time, she also worked for U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein in both California and Washington, D.C. She also served as a research professor for the City University of New York School of Public Health and Policy and executive director at Georgetown's Global Health Initiative. McKean's advocacy for public health also meant that she was willing to criticize anyone found to be going against scientific research, as shown in 2019, where she criticized her uncle, the aforementioned RFK Jr., and his nonprofit Children's Health Defense for spreading anti-vaccine misinformation. She also co-signed a letter in March of 2020, urging then Vice President Mike Pence, then head of a COVID-19 task force, to take up scientific recommendations and sign off on enough funding to battle the at the time expanding COVID-19 pandemic. Then, when things seemed on the up for her, fate would once again rear its ugly head. On April 2nd, 2020, McKean and her 8-year-old son Gideon McKean were canoeing in the community of Shadyside, Maryland, near her mother's waterfront property. Reports had indicated that they were attempting to retrieve a kickball that had landed in the water. Due to high winds on that day, they were sent further into the Chesapeake Bay, and they went missing. Officials first got word of their disappearance at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, when a man reported a woman and her child, likely the McKean duo, near the Columbia Beach Community Pier. They were last seen at Herring Bay, 10 miles south of the state capital of Annapolis. Search and rescue efforts soon began, with units ranging from the Maryland State Police to the Coast Guard and other departments pitching in. The next evening, an overturned canoe was found, but search efforts were called off due to darkness, and resumed the next day. On April 6, Maeve Kennedy McKean's lifeless body was found. Her cause of death was later confirmed to be from an accidental drowning. She was only 40 years old. Her son Gideon's body was found 2 days later, on April 8. Due to COVID restrictions, a funeral could not take place, so an online memorial service took place on April 11, with it being seen by over 3,000 people. The remains of both Maeve and Gideon McKean were cremated and later scattered off the coast of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. As of July of 2025, she is the most recent member of the Kennedy family to fall victim to the Kennedy curse. There have been fewer families that have suffered the amount of mishaps, tragedies, and deaths as that of the Kennedy family. From famous members who sadly had their lives cut short, to those who fought long battles with their health but had ultimately succumbed to them, those who died serving our country, and more. Some of the lives shown here have been remembered in the decades since their passing, while other lives that have seemed to be forgotten in history, only remembered by the very few, if anyone. This video is meant to serve one purpose: to educate those on those lives, and to show to the world that not all that you see either on television or in history books is the full story. There are stories of others that have been forgotten, as shown here, and it is up to future generations to educate ourselves and gain further knowledge, and to not let these stories shrivel up in the memory hole known as American history. Now, I hope you found this video to be entertaining, interesting, and informative. It is the first time I have ever produced a video of this caliber, and if it does well enough, and if I have the motivation, I will do more videos of this style. Thank you for watching. Please go ahead and like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys again next time. Thank you.